For the vast majority of human history, the scales of justice were balanced on something incredibly fragile: the human word. If a crime occurred in the shadows, its resolution depended entirely on eyewitnesses, who are notoriously unreliable, on confessions, which were often coerced, or on sheer blind luck. For centuries, if a killer left no witnesses behind, they effectively left no trail. The perfect crime wasn't a masterpiece of planning, it was simply the reality of a world without science. But beneath the surface of every crime scene, a silent world was waiting to be discovered. A world of microscopic fibers, unique ridges on a fingertip, and the very blueprint of life hidden within a drop of blood. Slowly, methodically, forensic science began to transform criminal investigations. It shifted the power from intuition to evidence, evidence that does not forget, does not lie, and can speak for itself long after the participants are gone. Tonight, we are going deeper than the headlines. We are exploring the landmark cases that didn't just shock the public, they fundamentally rewired the engine of justice. These are the stories of how fingerprints, dental records, and the DNA revolution turned the tide against the unsolvable crime.
Our journey begins in the sweltering late summer heat of Chicago, 1910. To understand this case, you have to understand the era. In 1910, forensics was a word most people didn't know. Detectives relied on the third degree, intense interrogations, and basic physical descriptions. Fingerprinting was seen by the general public as a parlor trick or a strange hobby for eccentric scientists. That perception was about to be shattered on the night of September 19th. Clarence Hiller lived in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago with his wife and children. He was a man of habit, a respected clerk for the Rock Island Railroad. But at 2 a.m., that stability was pierced by the screams of his wife, Alice. A stranger had entered their home. Hiller, acting on instinct to protect his family, confronted the intruder at the head of the stairs. A violent struggle ensued, tumbling down into the darkness of the hallway. 2 shots rang out. By the time Alice reached her husband, the intruder was gone, and Clarence Hiller was bleeding out on the floor. He died moments later. The Chicago Police Department was under immense pressure. They caught a break just blocks away when they intercepted a man named Thomas Jennings. He was out of breath, his clothes were torn, and most damningly, he was carrying a loaded .38 caliber revolver. In any other year, the case would have relied on the revolver and the proximity. But a detective named William Bulger noticed something on the Hiller property that changed everything. The Hillers had recently been painting their house. On a porch railing, near the point of entry, the killer had reached out to steady himself. Pressed into the drying, tacky white paint were 4 distinct impressions of a left hand. The police didn't just look at them, they sawed the railing off and brought it to the station. The trial of Thomas Jennings became a circus of science. The prosecution brought in 4 different experts to testify that the prints in the paint matched Jennings perfectly. The defense fought back with fury. They argued that fingerprintism was a cult-like belief and that no 2 people having different prints was a claim that couldn't possibly be proven. To prove the validity of the science in open court, one of the experts took a piece of paper, had a juror touch it, and then developed the print right in front of the judge. The jury was mesmerized. In 1911, the Illinois Supreme Court issued a ruling that still echoes today. They stated that the reliability of this system of identification is now so generally conceded that it was no longer an experiment. It was evidence. Thomas Jennings was hanged for his crime, but his legacy was the permanent installation of the fingerprint as the gold standard of identification.
To find the roots of identifying the dead, we have to travel further back to 1849 Boston. This case proves that forensic science isn't just about high-tech labs, it's about the meticulous observation of the human body. Dr. George Parkman was one of Boston's most famous citizens, wealthy, meticulous, and known for his lean frame and extremely punctual nature. On November 23, 1849, Parkman went for his usual walk through the city to collect rents. He never returned. The disappearance of such a high-profile figure sent Boston into a panic. A janitor at Harvard Medical College, Ephraim Littlefield, began to suspect a chemistry professor named John Webster. Webster was a man of high social standing but low bank balances. He owed Parkman a significant amount of money. Littlefield noticed Webster behaving strangely, locking himself in his lab and running the furnace at intense heats for hours. Driven by a gut feeling, Littlefield spent 2 days tunneling through a brick wall into the vault beneath Webster's private privy. What he found there was a nightmare, dismembered human remains. But how do you prove a pile of bone fragments belongs to a specific person in 1849? The prosecution turned to a dentist named Nathan Keep. This was a revolutionary move. Dr. Keep had actually made a set of dentures for George Parkman years prior. He brought the mold of Parkman's jaw into the courtroom and showed the jury how the charred teeth found in Webster's furnace fit the mold perfectly. It was the first time forensic odontology was used to secure a murder conviction. The case established that the body of the crime could be proven through scientific fragments, even if a recognizable corpse no longer existed. By the mid-1980s, the world was on the cusp of the greatest forensic breakthrough in history: DNA. In 1984, Sir Alec Jeffreys in England discovered that certain areas of the human genome contain sequences that repeat, and these short tandem repeats are unique to every individual. The first major test of this science in the United States occurred in Orlando, Florida in 1987. A serial rapist was terrorizing the city, breaking into homes and attacking women at knife point. Despite a massive manhunt, police were struggling. They eventually zeroed in on Tommie Lee Andrews, but the eyewitness evidence was shaky. The prosecution decided to take a massive risk. They sent semen samples from the crime scene and blood samples from Andrews to a laboratory called Life Codes. At the first trial, the defense successfully argued that DNA was voodoo science, and the jury hung. But in the second trial, the prosecution simplified the science, explaining it as a genetic blueprint. The expert from Life Codes testified that the chance of the DNA belonging to someone other than Andrews was 1 in 10 billion. That was more than the population of the Earth. The jury returned a guilty verdict in under 2 hours. Tommie Lee Andrews didn't just go to prison. He opened the floodgates. Within months, every major police department in America was looking for ways to implement DNA testing. If DNA was a sword for the prosecution, it was a shield for the innocent. In 1984, the body of 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton was found in a wooded area in Maryland. It was a crime of unimaginable brutality. Police, desperate for a suspect, focused on Kirk Bloodsworth, a former Marine, based on a vague composite sketch and the testimony of 5 eyewitnesses. Bloodsworth had no criminal record and no connection to the girl, but the power of eyewitness testimony is a heavy weight in court. He was convicted and sentenced to death. For years, Bloodsworth sat on death row, watching his appeals fail. He spent his time in the prison library, and in 1992, he read a book about the first DNA cases in England. He realized that if science could prove guilt, it could prove his innocence. He fought for a year to have the evidence from the 1984 crime scene, specifically a small stain on the victim's clothing, tested using the new PCR polymerase chain reaction method. When the results came back, the DNA did not match Kirk Bloodsworth. It matched an inmate already in the prison system for a similar crime. In 1993, Bloodsworth walked out of prison a free man, the first person on death row to be exonerated by DNA. His case proved that the justice system was fallible and that science was the only objective arbiter of truth. We conclude with the most recent revolution, investigative genetic genealogy. For 40 years, the Golden State Killer was a phantom. Between 1974 and 1986, he committed at least 13 murders and over 50 rapes across California. He was a master of evasion, wearing masks, using gloves, and scouting neighborhoods with military precision. By the early 2000s, investigators had his DNA, but it wasn't in any criminal database. He had never been arrested for a felony. The case was dead cold. In 2018, investigator Paul Holes and geneticist Barbara Ray Venter tried a Hail Mary. They took the killer's DNA and uploaded it to GDmatch, a public genealogy site used by people looking for their ancestors. They weren't looking for a direct match, they were looking for third or fourth cousins. By building a massive family tree of thousands of people, they narrowed the search down to one branch of a family from Exeter, California. They found a man who fit the age, the location, and the background. Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer.
Detectives followed D'Angelo and collected a piece of discarded trash, a tissue, to get his current DNA. It was a perfect match. This case changed everything. It meant that even if a criminal never leaves their own DNA in a database, their relatives' DNA can still lead the police to their door. It was the ultimate no-hiding-place moment in forensic history.
From the wet paint on a Chicago porch to the digital family trees of the 21st century, forensic science has traveled an incredible distance. We no longer live in a world where the loudest voice in the courtroom wins. We live in a world where the smallest trace, a skin cell, a tooth fragment, a genetic sequence, carries more weight than 1,000 witnesses. As technology continues to evolve, from rapid DNA sequencing to AI-driven crime scene reconstruction, the perfect crime becomes harder and harder to commit. But these advancements also carry a heavy responsibility. We must ensure that science is used to find the truth, not just to find a suspect. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cases that changed everything. If you found this documentary insightful, please like and subscribe for more explorations into the intersection of science and justice. What case do you think had the biggest impact? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.